We are going to start with some exclusive breaking news. CBC News has learned more details about the conversations Canada has had with the Indian government and the secret intelligence they base those conversations on. The CBC's Evan Dyer joins me now with those exclusive details. So Evan, what can you tell us about what Canada knows?
Well, of course, David, there is a criminal investigation into the homicide of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, which is being conducted by the Integrated Homicide Investigations Team out in BC, and they're playing that investigation very close to their chests, although it is ongoing. But of course, Canada based its allegation also on security intelligence information, the kind of information that may never appear in a court, but that did give Canada the confidence to go ahead and make this allegation. And what we've learned from senior government sources is that Canada has both human intelligence and signals intelligence, indicating the involvement of Indian government officials in this crime. And of course, signals intelligence generally means intercepts. Human intelligence means people coming forward and talking about it.
Okay, so that's the two types of intelligence. Where did this intelligence come from?
It doesn't come only from Canadian sources. And in fact, some of the signals intelligence that this allegation is based on came from a Five Eyes ally, which of course means that that Five Eyes ally is aware of the evidence backing this case and therefore can form its own views on the veracity of these allegations. They are the ones providing some of this information, so they know about the conversations that went on between Indian diplomats and other members of the Indian government and some of the people a little bit closer to the actual events, to the actual crimes. So let's listen actually to something that was an interesting comment from the U.S. National Security Advisor today, Jake Sullivan, because while there has been some reports about Canada's allies not coming forward to support Canada that much, and of course there has been a restrained reaction from some of them because India is a very important country, not a rogue state, and it's a country the West is actively wooing. There is one ally that has distinguished itself somewhat by being more supportive of Canada, and that's the United States. So let's listen to Jake Sullivan speaking just earlier this afternoon.
As soon as we heard from the Canadian Prime Minister publicly about the allegations, we went out publicly ourselves and expressed our deep concern about them, our support for a law enforcement process to get to the bottom of exactly what happened and to ensure that the perpetrators are held accountable. I'm not going to get into the substance of private diplomatic conversations, but we are in constant contact with our Canadian counterparts. We are consulting with them closely. We support the efforts that they are undertaking in this investigation, and we have also been in touch with the Indian government as well. And I will leave it at that for today, only to say that I have seen in the press some efforts to try to drive a wedge between the United States and Canada on this issue, and I firmly reject the idea that there is a wedge between the U.S. and Canada. We have deep concerns about the allegations, and we would like to see this investigation carried forward and the perpetrators held to account.
And that, of course, was a reference to some of the reporting we've seen in the Washington Post in particular, but also picked up in some Canadian media, suggesting that Canada had asked the United States for support ahead of time and been rebuffed. And of course, we've seen not only the White House push back very strongly against that, but the Washington Post also have to issue a retraction about that story.
Okay, Evan, you mentioned signals intelligence. I don't know if you can give us any more details on that, on who or what that may include, but also you have some information about conversations that India has had with Canada. Walk us through those as well.
Well, Canada actually has been in touch with India for some time about this prior to the conversation between Prime Minister Trudeau and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. There were visits to India by Canadian officials, and the most senior perhaps of those would be Canada's National Security Advisor, the woman who does Jake Sullivan's job here, which is Jody Thomas. She visited India last month and was there between the 16th and 19th of August for talks with the Indians. And again, this month, between the 6th and the 11th. That visit, of course, coincided with the Prime Minister's visit to New Delhi for the G20. She actually arrived slightly before him and was able to leave the country before him as well, because, of course, his plane was delayed. But Jody Thomas left on a separate flight from India and went to the UK to start talking to Canada's Five Eyes allies about this case, knowing that it was very likely to become public in the near future. And one thing we're hearing, David, about those conversations, those private conversations between Canadian officials and Indian officials, is that in none of them have the Indians denied these allegations. Despite what they may have said in public, which we've seen from people like Subramaniam Jaishankar, the Indian foreign minister, calling these allegations absurd, in private, Canadian officials tell us the Indians have not denied them.
Okay, Evan, great work. Thanks so much. That's the CBC's Evan Dyer.
Thanks.
All right, here with me now is Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland. Deputy Prime Minister, I know we planned to talk about a bunch of things, but this has come up. I wonder, with everything that Evan has just laid out, do you have any doubt, should Canadians have any doubt, that India was behind this?
So, look, David. Hi, Evan. I respect the work of journalists very much. I used to be a journalist, and I respect your job is to ask me these questions. I hope you will understand, and I think Canadians will understand, that my most important job is not to prejudice an ongoing law enforcement investigation, which at the end of the day is about a Canadian who was killed. I can't say anything to get in the way of that. And equally, Canada cherishes our relationships with our Five Eyes allies. Those are a real foundation of Canada's security. We are a good partner to our Five Eyes allies, and they're good partners to us. And that partnership rests very much on those conversations, intelligence conversations, being held in confidence. So I can't comment on those either.
On the big picture bilateral relationship, I mean, your government just recently launched the Indo-Pacific strategy, which called for deepening ties with India. Can that still happen with this out there and with Narendra Modi as the Prime Minister of that country?
I think that is a really good question. And the way I'd like to answer it is by sharing with you the way we are thinking about this and what I think is the reality of this situation. We recognize this is a really serious situation, and it's serious first and foremost because a Canadian was killed in Canada. The seriousness of the situation was reflected in the fact that the Prime Minister addressed it and shared what he could with Canadians in our most serious forum of democracy, the House of Commons. For Canada, this is first and foremost about the safety and security of every single Canadian in Canada, and it is first and foremost about Canada being a rule of law country. That's where this all has started, and that is the approach that we are taking and are going to take.
But meanwhile, we are in this diplomatic row with India, and they are now suspending visas for Canadians to come there. We've each expelled diplomats. Are you thinking about retaliating on the visa issue with India?
As I say, for us, this is not about geopolitics. This is about Canada, the safety of Canadians in Canada. This is about the rule of law in Canada and respecting all of that. And that is where this started. That is going to be the North Star for our government as we handle a really tragic situation. A man was killed in Canada. And I think the most important thing is for all Canadians to know we are going to be, as any Canadian government needs to be, absolutely resolute in bringing the killers of a Canadian in Canada to justice. That is our guiding principle here.
Can you do that without India's cooperation? There's a lot of skepticism from people who work in law enforcement and in national security for their whole careers, whether this can be done to actually get to a criminal prosecution if India doesn't cooperate. And at this point, it doesn't look like they will.
So this is an ongoing law enforcement investigation. Right. I have a lot of confidence in Canada's law enforcement officials. They are working very hard on this. They're working very hard on it. And I think we need to leave it to them to do their jobs. What they need to know, and I think what the Prime Minister's address really gave them total confidence in, is they have the Government of Canada's utter support. This is about bringing the killers of a Canadian in Canada to justice. And I think every single Canadian knows it's our job to do it, and we will do it.
At the United Nations this week, Prime Minister Trudeau, and again today, expressed full support for Ukraine in its fight against Russia's invasion. But we are seeing out of Poland that they may be preparing to scale back some of its support for Ukraine. The Prime Minister there would only say that his country would only supply with already promised weapons. There had some tensions between those two countries. Are you worried at all that support for Ukraine may be fracturing, especially with a critical ally like Poland on this?
You know, again here, like there are so many issues that we face as a government that are really murky and complicated, and where you have to deal with kind of balancing different interests and finding the right mix. This is another issue where it actually is black and white. As President Zelensky has been saying at the UN this week, this is one of those rare moments in human history where it is truly a fight between good and evil, between democracy and dictatorship. This is about such a basic principle. Is it okay? Can it stand in 2023 that one country invades another, takes over its territory, kills and tortures its people, kidnaps its children? And the clear answer is no, that is not okay. And that is why Canada is absolutely resolute and clear and firm in our support. I think it would be a privilege for Canada and Canadians to have the chance to show Ukraine and Ukrainians and the world that Canada is steadfast and resolute. Am I worried that whether the rest of the world, whether the rest of our allies will continue to be resolute? Of course. You have to work hard to maintain that support, to maintain that coalition. Canada is doing that every single day because we believe our national security and our most fundamental values are at stake here. And Canada, starting with the Prime Minister, stepped up before the war. We stepped up when the war started, and we will take every opportunity to assure Ukrainians, assure the world that we are there. We'll be there for as long as it takes. And if we can play a role in stiffening the spines of some of our other friends and allies, we'll be happy to do that too.
President Zelensky was in the UN. He's gone to Washington. Everybody in Canada is reporting that he's going to be speaking to the House of Commons tomorrow and have events in Toronto tomorrow evening. I know this has not been officially confirmed by the government, so this may be another issue where you cannot speak in specifics. But hypothetically, if Volodymyr Zelensky were to address Parliament tomorrow, what do you think Canadians could expect to hear, and what would you like them to hear from the leader of Ukraine?
You remember, we talked a lot during the NAFTA negotiations, and I had a firm principle. Never answer hypothetical questions. A bad thing to do in life, especially for a government leader. But I will say this, especially given your last question, which was really an important one, which is the question about, ensuring that the world remains resolute in supporting Ukraine, given the bravery and the courage of Ukrainians themselves. I think it would be a privilege and an honor for all Canadians, whether they are members of Parliament or playing any other role in our great country, to show the people of Ukraine and to show the world that we are resolute, that we will not falter, and that we recognize that, sure, I hear people talking about Ukraine fatigue among Ukraine's allies. The only people who have the people who really could be complaining about fatigue are the Ukrainians themselves. They are the one, they are the ones who are fighting and dying. They haven't asked us to fight for them. All they're asking for is some weapons and some financial support so they can fight this fight, which is a fight for all of us. I think any opportunity that Canada could have to show its support for Ukraine and, thereby maybe help the Ukrainians to keep going and to show the world that we all need to be there, that would be a great day for Canada.
Okay, this is not a hypothetical. Alberta today announced plans to explore the creation of an Alberta pension plan, and Danielle Smith, based on a report she has, says they might be entitled to more than half of the assets that exist in the Canada Pension Plan Investment Fund. Does the Finance Department of Canada agree with that assessment, and how do you view this move to the potential future of the Canada Pension Plan itself?
So let me tell you another thing which is not hypothetical, and that is the absolutely essential role that the Canada Pension Plan plays in the lives of all of Canadians from coast to coast to coast. This is the basis for the security of millions and millions of Canadians. It is the foundation upon which millions and millions of Canadians can rely and know that that's going to be what guarantees a dignified retirement. And by the way, like countries around the world, you know, the Canada Pension Plan, it is one of our crown jewels that countries around the world seek to emulate. I am aware that Alberta today put forward a position. That position is serious. It's going to be important for me as finance minister and finance officials to study that position carefully. I'm going to also want to speak with the finance ministers of other provinces across the country who are implicated in this. And prior to having those conversations, I'm going to hold further comment until I've had a chance to do that.
Okay, one final topic to touch on is you've unveiled your new affordability legislation, implementing the measures promised at the Liberal caucus in London, Ontario. You're calling on the opposition to help this go through. Bail reform passed very quickly this week. Do you have any assurances from the opposition parties you can get this legislation through the House of Commons?
I hope we'll have those assurances. You know, I think that, I know that this is legislation that Canadians urgently need, that will answer the challenges Canadians have today and answer the challenges they're facing tomorrow. This is not about politics, it's about getting the job done for Canadians, and it would be fantastic if opposition parties could work together with us to make it happen. I think actually that would reflect well on every single MP in the House of Commons.
The core measures, though, removing the GST on rental construction, the changes to competition legislation for the grocery sector, it's going to take some time for Canadians to feel that, right? Just, you know, rentals take time to build and get approved, and competition takes a while for the market to readjust. So that can't be it from you for this fall, right? Should we anticipate other measures on the affordability, cost of living issues from you as finance minister, maybe in the fall economic statement?
Absolutely. And not just from me. We're taking, as you saw, maybe you saw, we had a press conference with a bunch of ministers today. We're taking a real whole of government approach to this challenge, exactly as we did when we were, you know, in the depths of the COVID pandemic. And so yes, you will see our government, you know, rolling up our sleeves, working on cost of living for Canadians every single day.